The newest weapon in the United States being used against patients is called the Quality Adjusted Life Year, or QALY. It's a showy name for a mathematical model that seeks to determine the value of a disabled life while threatening the very thing patients living with unmet medical needs rely on: breakthrough science. Its proponents say it could help control drug prices, but they overlook that it has been used by governments around the world to deny coverage for medications based on their cost. A bureaucrat should not be allowed to tell me how much my life is worth because I was born with a rare childhood disease. The thing is, that childhood disease called cystic fibrosis did not kill me. Instead, I'm alive and healthy. One of the most fundamental flaws of QALY is that it is used subjectively, which then begs the question, who is doing these analyses? In the United States, a self-proclaimed watchdog called the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, or ICER, is driving the train under the flag of reform. ICER's analyses have been an instrument of the drug pricing war that holds patients and families hostage. It forces us to ask the question, will our insurance cover our medications? The cornerstone of the calculation is disability weight adjustment to predict when a patient might die. From ICER's perspective, it is not if cystic fibrosis kills a person born with CF, but rather when. The when is important because it determines when my payer stops accruing medical expenses. To account for that, modelers apply a utility function to a patient's life to illustrate his or her health. The utility is then multiplied by the expected number of years of life a patient has left to live to yield the additional QALYs recovered by a drug. The scale ICER uses in its cystic fibrosis reports is based on pulmonary function. It maintains that the highest utility a person with CF can achieve is 0.92. Perfect health would otherwise be assigned a 1. The implicit meaning here is that a person living with cystic fibrosis can never achieve full health even with medical intervention. Applying the scale to my own life, I made the journey from a health utility of 0.92 when I was at my healthiest, all the way down to 0.692. The slide started when I suffered my first massive hemoptysis, or coughing up blood. It happened on the football field during a conditioning session in high school. I collapsed and then came to the sight of dozens of concerned teenagers, my teammates, huddled around me as if they had all seen a ghost covered in blood. Coughing up blood is much more than Hollywood romanticizes it to be. It tastes like iron, then smells like it too when it starts to seep up into the sinus cavity. The telltale sign hemoptysis is coming on is a strange gurgle. Imagine a rattle coming from deep inside your chest. The body's natural reaction to it is to force as much of the blood out as it can with a deep, watery cough to make room for the exchange of fresh oxygen. The crescendo is when the blood is pushed out of the airways until it bursts into a cascade of red syrup. Its consistency is not unlike the maple syrup I like to put on my waffle in the morning. Now I'm at a health utility of 0.801 after a drug called Trikafta intervened. Those bouts of massive hemoptysis, long hospital stays, and everything in between are all distant memories. But somehow, I'm supposed to believe the decade I spent crawling out of critical illness is supposed to be captured in a few arbitrarily calculated numbers. I call that conjecture. The calculation is an attempt to normalize disease severity with the efficacy of varying medications and their costs across the health system. The results are supposed to aid in coverage decisions to show which medications recover the most QALYs and therefore should be covered. New York State Medicaid is one such example of a payer citing ICER's analysis of cystic fibrosis drugs. The problem with using ICER's model is twofold. First, the health utility scale used to determine QALYs very clearly assigns a lesser value to a person living with a terminal illness compared with a condition that could be cured. The National Council on Disability says, quote, they create an environment of systemic inequality where people with disabilities and chronic conditions that will be managed rather than cured are less likely to receive access to treatment under health systems that ration care utilizing QALY. QALY, of course, assumes rationed care. QALY calculations maintain that I can never truly be considered healthy when compared with people who can be cured of their health issues. Since the disability weighting is part of the multiplier, any benefit from a medication applied to my life will not be compared equally to a drug that cures someone else's health condition, because at the end of the day, I will still live with cystic fibrosis. With that inequality in mind, the National Council of Disabilities says QALY is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act when being used to determine coverage. The second flaw in the model is that it relies on applying Trikafta's cost over a patient's expected lifetime, wherein the model forces an unfair trade-off on people with terminal illness. It says that as I recovered from critical lung disease, I became more expensive to take care of because I did not die younger. It misses the whole goal of medical care, to keep people alive. The $311,000 annual listed price tag attached to Trikafta is huge, but it won't always be huge, even though ICER assumes it will. In that assumption, ICER misses one of the most important nuances of drug development. Newly branded medications are patent protected so that the drug developers can recoup the cost of developing it before making a profit. Those profits, however, don't last forever because the patents on branded drugs expire, at which point other drug makers are allowed to flood the market with near carbon copies, forcing the price down. ICER curiously does not input genericization into their models. Somehow, it's okay that I am penalized for getting older, but it assumes drugs and their prices do not age. The reality is they do. 90% of all drugs prescribed in the United States are generic, which costs little more than the price to produce them. Those generics were, at one point in their respective histories, branded. ICER even admits to omitting a genericization. Quote, estimating such changes may be especially difficult in the US market where drug prices are mostly unregulated and changes in prices occur relatively frequently. Oh, the irony. ICER says I will incur difficulty later in my own life because I'm disabled by way of applying a less than perfect utility value besides my symptoms, but they maintain that the math might be just a little too hard for them to overcome on the same time horizon. Payers truly capture unquantifiable value in generics. Patients they are covering reap the same health benefits, which broadly include lesser healthcare utilization, all for a significantly lower cost. The cystic fibrosis patients of tomorrow and generic versions of the miracle drug that I take today will be cheaper to care for because they will not suffer the same consequences of rapidly progressing illness that I live through, and they will no longer have to shoulder the burden of development cost of a drug since it will have already been paid off. Despite these two crucial flaws in quality calculations, ICER maintains that Trikafta's price is too high relative to its clinical benefits. One must look no further than the dysfunction in the antibiotic market to understand how disincentivized markets can truly cause harm. I understand the irony in my call for a shift to long-term thinking. I'm living with a terminal illness. ICER knows it, and I know it. But the difference between me and ICER is that I possess the power to look ahead, while bureaucrats do not. Instead of relying on bad math, policymakers should focus on the long-term consequences of putting up more barriers in front of patient care. We need to sever out-of-pocket costs from the healthcare system, embrace genericization, and value disabled lives equally now and forever. Thank you.